The darkness falls early, bringing with it a bone-chilling cold that seeps through every crack and crevice. Outside, the wind howls like a hungry wolf, driving needles of sleet against the humble dwelling. Inside, a family huddles around a smoky fire that struggles against the darkness, their breath visible in the frigid air. This is not a scene from some apocalyptic future. This was the reality for millions of medieval peasants across Europe for half the year, every year, for centuries. When temperatures plummeted and daylight dwindled to precious few hours, survival itself became the primary occupation of these resilient people. Modern humans, with our central heating, insulated homes and 24-hour supermarkets, can scarcely imagine facing winter with nothing but what our hands could make and our limited resources could provide. Yet medieval peasants not only survived, but developed ingenious systems to endure conditions that would break many of us today. Their story is not one of mere endurance, but of remarkable human adaptability and communal wisdom passed down through generations. Tonight we journey back to a time when winter wasn't just an inconvenience, but an existential threat. When the difference between life and death might be as simple as how well you'd banked your fire, or how tightly you'd thatched your roof. How did medieval peasants, with their limited technology and resources, manage to survive the brutal winter nights that claimed so many lives? The answers reveal not just their struggle, but their extraordinary ingenuity. Imagine building your home with nothing but the materials you could gather from the surrounding landscape, and only the simplest of tools. No power drills, no prefabricated materials, no hardware stores. This was the reality for medieval peasants, yet the homes they created were remarkable adaptations to their harsh environment. Archaeological excavations across Europe have revealed that peasant houses varied significantly by region, climate, and available materials, but they shared common principles of practical design born from necessity. In England, the typical peasant home was the cruck house, a timber-framed structure where curved wooden beams, crucks, formed an A-frame from ground to roof peak. Between these sturdy frames, walls were created using a technique called wattle and daub, a lattice of wooden strips, wattle, covered with a mixture of clay, straw, manure, and sometimes animal hair or blood, daub. This wasn't primitive construction, it was ingenious environmental engineering. Research from the Weald and Downland Living Museum in Sussex has demonstrated that these walls provided surprising insulation. The organic materials in daub created millions of tiny air pockets that trapped heat, functioning similarly to modern insulation. Experimental archaeology has shown that a well-maintained wattle and daub wall could achieve an R-value insulation measurement roughly equivalent to a basic insulated wall today. In colder regions like Scandinavia and parts of Eastern Europe, peasants developed different solutions. Archaeological remains from 10th century settlements in Denmark show houses partially dug into the ground, semi-subterranean dwellings that took advantage of the Earth's natural insulation. The ground maintains a more stable temperature than air, typically staying around 10 degrees Celsius, 50 degrees Fahrenheit, below the frost line, regardless of surface conditions. By building partially underground, these peasants effectively created a natural thermal barrier against the minus 20 degrees Celsius, minus 4 degrees Fahrenheit temperatures that could ravage northern Europe in winter. But perhaps most surprising to modern sensibilities was the deliberate incorporation of animal waste into construction. Far from being merely a desperate use of available materials, this represented sophisticated knowledge of thermal properties. Manure contains cellulose fibres that, when dried, create excellent insulation. Modern scientific analysis of preserved daub samples from a 13th century English peasant house found that manure-enhanced walls had approximately 20% better thermal retention than those without. The roof, typically thatched with reeds, straw or heather, depending on local resources, provided another crucial layer of insulation. A properly laid thatch could be up to 30 centimetres, 12 inches, thick, creating a remarkably effective barrier against both cold and moisture. Experimental reconstructions by historians at the Butser Ancient Farm in Hampshire have demonstrated that a well-maintained thatch roof can last 40 to 50 years and provide insulation comparable to modern standards. The dense layering of organic material created millions of tiny air pockets, nature's own double glazing. Perhaps most telling about the effectiveness of these medieval solutions is a 2018 thermal imaging study conducted on reconstructed medieval houses at the Weald and Downland Museum. The study found that a properly maintained medieval peasant house with a small fire burning could maintain interior temperatures 15 to 20 degrees Celsius, 27 to 36 degrees Fahrenheit, warmer than the outside during winter conditions. This difference could literally be life-saving during the coldest nights. The floors of these homes, contrary to popular depictions of bare earth, were often carefully engineered for warmth. Archaeological evidence from sites across England and France shows that many peasant homes had raised wooden platforms for sleeping, keeping inhabitants off the cold ground. In other regions, floors were layered with insulating materials, rushes, straw and dried herbs that not only provided warmth, but also pleasant aromas to combat the inevitable oily odours of close winter living. Windows, those necessary vulnerabilities in any structure, were minimal in peasant homes. Most had just small openings covered with oiled parchment, wooden shutters, or sometimes thin slices of horn, which allowed some light while minimising heat loss. The limited archaeological evidence we have suggests that these coverings reduced heat loss by as much as 30% compared to an open aperture. The entire structure was oriented with careful attention to the environment. Manor records from the Abbey of Cluny in France note that peasant houses were typically built with doors facing away from prevailing winter winds and positioned to maximise exposure to winter sunlight. This passive solar design principle, rediscovered by modern green architects, was intuitive knowledge for medieval builders who understood that survival depended on such details. What emerges from the archaeological and historical record is not a picture of primitive shelters, but rather of sophisticated environmental adaptations created through generations of accumulated knowledge. These weren't just houses, they were survival machines, carefully engineered from available materials to create microclimates that could sustain life through the darkest, coldest months of the year. As darkness falls and temperatures plummet, a medieval peasant family gathers around the central feature of their home, the hearth. This isn't merely a place for cooking, it's the beating heart of winter survival, the difference between life and death on the coldest nights. But the medieval hearth was far more sophisticated than the simple fire pit many imagine. Archaeological excavations across Europe reveal that by the 11th century, most peasant homes featured a central hearth, an open fire pit in the middle of the main room, with smoke escaping through a hole in the roof. This central positioning wasn't just traditional, it was thermodynamically optimal. Heat radiates equally in all directions, warming the entire space rather than being lost to an exterior wall. Experimental reconstructions at historical sites like West Stow Anglo-Saxon village have demonstrated that a central hearth could raise the ambient temperature of a typical peasant home by 10 to 15 degrees Celsius, 18 to 27 degrees Fahrenheit, above outside temperatures within just an hour of lighting. The fuel used in these hearths reveals another dimension of medieval ingenuity. While modern people might assume wood was the primary fuel, historical records tell a different story. Manor court rolls from 13th century England document strict regulations on wood gathering, indicating its value and relative scarcity. Instead, peasants relied on a diverse fuel portfolio that changed with seasons and availability. Peat, compressed plant matter cut from bogs, was a crucial winter fuel across northern Europe. Archaeological samples from medieval middens, waste heaps in Ireland, and Scotland show that peat was cut in standard blocks, dried during summer and stored for winter use. Scientific analysis reveals that a kilogram of dried peat contains approximately 15 to 21 megajoules of energy, less than coal but with the advantage of burning slowly and steadily. Manor records from the Abbey of Fountains in Yorkshire show that a typical peasant household would stockpile between 1,000 to 1,500 kilograms of dried peat for winter, representing roughly 25,000 megajoules of potential heat, enough to maintain survivable temperatures through the coldest months. When peat wasn't available, peasants turned to other ingenious fuel sources. Archaeological evidence from sites across Europe shows the burning of dried dung, particularly from cattle, compressed straw, gorse, heather, and even seaweed in coastal areas. These weren't inferior desperation fuels, but carefully selected alternatives with specific burning properties. Cattle dung, for instance, burns at lower temperatures but for longer periods than wood, making it ideal for overnight heating. A study of preserved dung samples from a 12th century midden in Denmark showed that properly dried cattle dung could burn for up to 8 hours at a steady temperature, perfect for maintaining heat through the long winter nights. The management of the hearth fire was an art form developed over generations. Manor household accounts and instructional texts, like the 13th century Seneschaucy, a manual for estate management, describe techniques for banking fires, covering burning embers with ashes to slow combustion without extinguishing it. This practice allowed a fire to smoulder through the night with minimal fuel consumption, ready to be revived in the morning. Experimental archaeology has demonstrated that a properly banked fire could maintain temperatures above freezing in a small dwelling for 8 to 10 hours with no additional fuel, a critical efficiency when resources were scarce. Smoke management was another sophisticated aspect of hearth technology. While the popular image of medieval homes includes smoke-filled interiors, the reality was more nuanced. By the later medieval period, many peasant homes included smoke bays or rudimentary chimneys. Archaeological evidence from sites in England and France shows that some homes had wattle hurdles, woven screens, placed above the fire at ceiling height, which would catch soot while allowing heat to circulate. The soot-covered hurdles would eventually be removed and used as fertiliser in gardens, a perfect example of medieval circular economy thinking. Even in homes without chimneys, smoke management was carefully considered. The smoke hole in the roof was often equipped with an adjustable cover operated by a pole, allowing inhabitants to regulate both smoke release and heat retention. Experimental reconstructions have shown that skilled management of this simple system could reduce smoke in the living area by up to 70% while minimising heat loss. The hearth also served as the centre of food preparation during winter, adding another dimension to its efficiency. Cooking pots suspended over the fire not only prepared meals, but added crucial humidity to the otherwise dry heated air. This moisture helped prevent respiratory problems that come with breathing dry air and reduced the fire risk from overly desiccated thatch and timber. Perhaps most fascinating is the evidence for heat storage systems. Archaeological findings from several northern European sites show stones arranged around hearths. These weren't random, but purposeful thermal batteries. Stones would absorb heat during peak fire times and continue radiating it for hours after the flames died down. Similarly, clay benches built near hearths in some regions served both as seating and heat storage, warming slowly but releasing heat steadily throughout the night. The entire structure was oriented with careful attention to the environment. Manor records from the Abbey of Cluny in France note that peasant houses were typically built with doors facing away from prevailing winter winds and positioned to maximise exposure to winter sunlight. This passive solar design principle, rediscovered by modern green architects, was intuitive knowledge for medieval builders who understood that survival depended on such details. What emerges from the archaeological and historical record is not a picture of primitive shelters, but rather of sophisticated environmental adaptations created through generations of accumulated knowledge. These weren't just houses, they were survival machines, carefully engineered from available materials to create microclimates that could sustain life through the darkest, coldest months of the year. As darkness falls and temperatures plummet, a medieval peasant family gathers around the central feature of their home, the hearth. This isn't merely a place for cooking, it's the beating heart of winter survival, the difference between life and death on the coldest nights. But the medieval hearth was far more sophisticated than the simple fire pit many imagine. Archaeological excavations across Europe reveal that by the 11th century, most peasant homes featured a central hearth, an open fire pit in the middle of the main room, with smoke escaping through a hole in the roof. This central positioning wasn't just traditional, it was thermodynamically optimal. Heat radiates equally in all directions, warming the entire space rather than being lost to an exterior wall. Experimental reconstructions at historical sites like West Stow Anglo-Saxon village have demonstrated that a central hearth could raise the ambient temperature of a typical peasant home by 10 to 15 degrees Celsius, 18 to 27 degrees Fahrenheit, above outside temperatures within just an hour of lighting. The fuel used in these hearths reveals another dimension of medieval ingenuity. While modern people might assume wood was the primary fuel, historical records tell a different story. Manor court rolls from 13th century England document strict regulations on wood gathering, indicating its value and relative scarcity. Instead, peasants relied on a diverse fuel portfolio that changed with seasons and availability. Peat, compressed plant matter cut from bogs, was a crucial winter fuel across northern Europe. Archaeological samples from medieval middens, waste heaps in Ireland, and Scotland show that peat was cut in standard blocks, dried during summer and stored for winter use. Scientific analysis reveals that a kilogram of dried peat contains approximately 15 to 21 megajoules of energy, less than coal, but with the advantage of burning slowly and steadily. Manor records from the Abbey of Fountains in Yorkshire show that a typical peasant household would stockpile between 1,000 to 1,500 kilograms of dried peat for winter, representing roughly 25,000 megajoules of potential heat, enough to maintain survivable temperatures through the coldest months. When peat wasn't available, peasants turned to other ingenious fuel sources. Archaeological evidence from sites across Europe shows the burning of dried dung, particularly from cattle, compressed straw, gorse, heather, and even seaweed in coastal areas. These weren't inferior desperation fuels, but carefully selected alternatives with specific burning properties. Cattle dung, for instance, burns at lower temperatures but for longer periods than wood, making it ideal for overnight heating. A study of preserved dung samples from a 12th century midden in Denmark showed that properly dried cattle dung could burn for up to 8 hours at a steady temperature, perfect for maintaining heat through the long winter nights. The management of the hearth fire was an art form developed over generations. Manor household accounts and instructional texts, like the 13th century Seneschalcy, a manual for estate management, describe techniques for banking fires, covering burning embers with ashes to slow combustion without extinguishing it. This practice allowed a fire to smoulder through the night with minimal fuel consumption, ready to be revived in the morning. Experimental archaeology has demonstrated that a properly banked fire could maintain temperatures above freezing in a small dwelling for 8 to 10 hours with no additional fuel, a critical efficiency when resources were scarce. Smoke management was another sophisticated aspect of hearth technology. While the popular image of medieval homes includes smoke-filled interiors, the reality was more nuanced. By the later medieval period, many peasant homes included smoke bays or rudimentary chimneys. Archaeological evidence from sites in England and France shows that some homes had wattle hurdles, woven screens, placed above the fire at ceiling height, which would catch soot while allowing heat to circulate. The soot-covered hurdles would eventually be removed and used as fertilizer in gardens, a perfect example of medieval circular economy thinking. Even in homes without chimneys, smoke management was carefully considered. The smoke hole in the roof was often equipped with an adjustable cover operated by a pole, allowing inhabitants to regulate both smoke release and heat retention. Experimental reconstructions have shown that skilled management of this simple system could reduce smoke in the living area by up to 70% while minimising heat loss. The hearth also served as the centre of food preparation during winter, adding another dimension to its efficiency. Cooking pots suspended over the fire not only prepared meals, but added crucial humidity to the otherwise dry heated air. This moisture helped prevent respiratory problems that come with breathing dry air and reduced the fire risk from overly desiccated thatch and timber. Perhaps most fascinating is the evidence for heat storage systems. Archaeological findings from several northern European sites show stones arranged around hearths. These weren't random, but purposeful thermal batteries. Stones would absorb heat during peak fire times and continue radiating it for hours after the flames died down. Similarly, clay benches built near hearths in some regions served both as seating and heat storage, warming slowly but releasing heat steadily throughout the night. The medieval hearth wasn't just a fire, it was a sophisticated environmental control system developed through centuries of trial and error, representing the accumulated wisdom of generations facing the existential threat of winter cold. In many ways, it was the medieval equivalent of our modern HVAC systems, but operated with intimate knowledge rather than automated controls. The first snowfall brings more than just cold. It heralds the beginning of a critical test for medieval peasants. Summer's abundance is now a distant memory, and the spectre of hunger looms alongside that of freezing. Yet medieval communities had developed remarkably sophisticated food preservation and storage systems that not only prevented starvation, but maintained nutritional diversity through the barren months. When excavating a medieval peasant home in Lincolnshire in 1992, archaeologists discovered something unexpected beneath the packed earth floor. A series of clay-lined pits, approximately 1 metre deep. Similar features have since been found across numerous European sites, revealing one of the peasants' most valuable winter resources, the underground storage pit. These subterranean larders maintain temperatures between 4 to 10 degrees Celsius, 39 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit, even when surface temperatures plunged below freezing, creating natural refrigeration that slowed food spoilage. Manor records from the Abbey of Bury St Edmunds detail how these pits were prepared, lined with straw, filled with produce, covered with more straw, and sealed with clay caps. This created a modified atmosphere low in oxygen and high in carbon dioxide, essentially the same principle used in modern controlled atmosphere storage for apples and root vegetables. Scientific analysis of preserved plant remains from these pits shows they were primarily used for storing apples, pears, turnips, carrots, and other root vegetables, which could remain edible for 4 to 6 months under these conditions. For grains, the crucial caloric foundation of the medieval diet, different solutions were developed. Archaeological evidence from sites across Europe shows dedicated granaries with raised floors to prevent moisture and rodent access. But more intriguing are the grain storage techniques used within peasant homes. Excavations have revealed large ceramic storage jars, often partially buried in house floors to maintain stable temperatures. In some regions, grain was stored in tightly woven baskets sealed with clay, creating airtight containers that prevented both moisture damage and insect infestation. The effectiveness of these storage methods is documented in manor accounts, which record grain reserves lasting from harvest until the following summer. A particularly detailed account from the Manor of Cuxham in Oxfordshire shows that in 1316 to 17, during the Great Famine, peasant households still maintained grain stores sufficient for 4 to 5 months, demonstrating the resilience of these preservation systems even in crisis years. Perhaps the most sophisticated preservation techniques involved protein sources, crucial for winter nutrition, but naturally prone to rapid spoilage. Smoking, a preservation method still used today, was refined to an art form. Archaeological excavations have found specialised smoking chambers attached to some peasant dwellings, while manor records describe communal smoking facilities in many villages. The process wasn't crude or simplistic. Different woods were selected for specific flavours and preservation properties. Oak provided long-lasting heat and strong preservative compounds, while fruitwoods imparted milder flavours to delicate meats like poultry. Scientific analysis of preserved food residues from medieval sites reveals that smoking wasn't just about flavour. It effectively deposited phenolic compounds that inhibited bacterial growth. Modern laboratory testing of traditionally smoked meats shows that properly smoked products have significantly reduced levels of spoilage bacteria and can remain safe to eat for months without refrigeration. Salt preservation represented another sophisticated technology, though one often controlled by manorial authorities due to salt's value. Manor records from coastal regions document salt rights, specific allocations allowing peasants to produce or purchase set amounts of salt for winter preservation. Archaeological evidence from inland areas shows salt being transported over remarkable distances, underscoring its critical importance. The 13th century household records from Beaulieu Abbey note that a typical peasant family required approximately 2 to 3 kilograms of salt annually, primarily for food preservation. The preservation process itself was carefully calibrated. Meat wasn't simply packed in salt, but processed through specific brining and drying sequences. Archaeological evidence from waste pits shows butchery patterns optimized for preservation. Meat cut into smaller portions with maximized surface area for salt penetration. Historical records from the 13th century describe meat preserved this way, remaining edible for up to 6 months, crucial for stretching protein sources through winter. Fermentation provided another preservation pathway, converting perishable foods into stable forms while often enhancing their nutritional value. Archaeological evidence shows widespread use of ceramic fermentation crocks and wooden barrels. Analysis of residues from these vessels reveals a diverse fermentation culture. Cabbage becoming sauerkraut, milk transformed into cheese and yogurt, fruits preserved as alcoholic beverages. These weren't merely preservation methods, but nutritional strategies. Fermentation increases bioavailability of certain nutrients and produces beneficial compounds absent in raw foods. The medieval diet was further extended through drying techniques. Excavations have revealed specialised drying racks in many peasant homes, positioned above hearths to take advantage of rising heat. Apples, pears, plums and berries were sliced and dried, creating compact, stable food sources, rich in calories and nutrients. Experimental archaeology has demonstrated that properly dried fruits can retain up to 70% of their vitamin content for several months, providing crucial micronutrients during winter when fresh produce was unavailable. Perhaps most impressive was the integrated nature of these preservation systems. They weren't isolated techniques, but part of a comprehensive approach to food security. Manor records show careful planning of preservation activities timed to seasonal availability. The 13th century agricultural calendar from Ramsey Abbey details a preservation schedule, starting with early summer berries and continuing through late autumn nuts and root vegetables, creating a diversified winter food portfolio that provided both caloric sufficiency and nutritional balance. This sophisticated approach to food preservation wasn't merely about survival. It represented generations of accumulated knowledge about nutrition, microbiology, and food chemistry, developed through careful observation and passed down through practical instruction. The medieval peasant's winter larder wasn't just a food storage system. It was an advanced technology for nutritional time shifting, allowing summer's abundance to sustain life through winter's scarcity. The wooden trencher steams in the dim firelight as a thick pottage is ladled from the bubbling cauldron. This isn't just any meal, it's a carefully calibrated survival strategy, the culmination of generations of nutritional wisdom designed to sustain bodies through the brutal demands of winter. The medieval winter diet, far from being mere subsistence, represented a sophisticated understanding of human nutritional needs under extreme conditions. Manorial records from across Europe document a distinct shift in eating patterns as winter approached. The household roll of Eleanor de Montfort from 1265 shows that daily bread consumption increased from approximately 450 grams per person in summer to nearly 700 grams in winter months, a recognition of the increased caloric demands of cold weather. Modern nutritional science confirms the wisdom of this approach. Research indicates that humans in cold environments without modern heating may require up to 30% more calories to maintain body temperature and energy levels. Archaeological analysis of preserved human remains from medieval cemeteries provides direct evidence of this dietary shift. Isotope analysis of bones from the 12th century cemetery at Warren Percy in Yorkshire shows seasonal variations in carbon and nitrogen ratios, indicating systematic dietary changes between summer and winter. These changes reflect not just different food availability, but deliberate nutritional strategies for cold weather survival. The cornerstone of the winter diet was grain, primarily rye and barley in northern Europe, wheat in more favourable southern regions. These weren't simply consumed as bread, but transformed into a diverse range of high-calorie foods. Archaeological evidence from cooking vessels shows residues of porridges, gruels and pottages, thick, hearty mixtures that maximise caloric density. Experimental reconstructions based on medieval recipes demonstrate that a typical barley pottage with dried peas and preserved meat could provide approximately 600 to 800 calories per serving, an efficient fuel for cold weather. What made these grain-based dishes particularly effective as winter fare was their thermal properties. Manor household accounts frequently mention the importance of serving food hot during winter months. Modern research confirms the wisdom of this practice. A study published in the International Journal of Food Sciences and Nutrition found that consuming hot foods raises core body temperature more effectively than the same nutrients consumed cold, providing an immediate warming effect beyond the caloric content. Fats played a crucial role in the winter diet, with archaeological evidence showing a marked increase in fat consumption during colder months. Excavations of medieval kitchen middens show higher concentrations of animal bone marrow extraction marks in winter-associated layers, indicating intensive processing to access these calorie-dense nutrients. Manor accounts record the careful preservation of fats from autumn slaughtering, lard from pigs, tallow from sheep and cattle, stored in sealed crocks for winter use. This emphasis on fat wasn't merely about calories, but represented an intuitive understanding of its thermal properties. Modern research confirms that dietary fat consumption increases thermogenesis, heat production, more than equivalent calories from carbohydrates or proteins. A 2017 study in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition found that high-fat meals increase thermogenesis by approximately 14% compared to low-fat alternatives, a difference that could be life-saving in poorly heated medieval environments. Protein sources changed dramatically with the seasons. Summer's fresh meat gave way to preserved varieties, smoked, salted, and dried. Archaeological evidence from waste deposits shows different butchery patterns between seasons. Summer bones show cuts optimised for immediate consumption, while autumn processing focused on preservation-friendly portions. The preserved meats weren't just emergency rations, but were incorporated into cooking methods that maximised their nutritional value. One such method was the ubiquitous pottage, a thick soup or stew that would simmer for hours, sometimes days, over the hearth fire. Food historian Peter Brere's analysis of medieval cooking techniques has demonstrated that this slow cooking method extracted maximum nutrition from limited ingredients. Bones, gristle, and tough meat cuts would release gelatin and collagen during extended cooking, proteins that not only provided nutrition but created satisfying, warming textures that increased satiety. Modern nutritional analysis confirms that these slow-cooked preparations increase the bioavailability of nutrients compared to quicker cooking methods. Dairy products, particularly cheese, provided crucial winter protein. Manor records document autumn cheesemaking as a critical preparation for winter. The account rolls from Bolton Priory in Yorkshire show that approximately 30% of summer milk production was transformed into hard cheeses specifically for winter consumption. Archaeological evidence from storage areas shows specialised cheese storage structures designed to maintain appropriate humidity and temperature for long-term preservation. What's particularly notable about medieval winter nutrition was the sophisticated understanding of micronutrients long before vitamins were scientifically identified. Preserved fruits, carefully dried during summer abundance, provided essential vitamins. Fermented vegetables, particularly cabbage, as sauerkraut, delivered vitamin C throughout winter, preventing scurvy centuries before the vitamin was identified. Archaeological evidence shows widespread consumption of these preserved foods across all social classes, indicating their recognised importance. Herbs played a dual role in the winter diet, both as flavour enhancers and as medicine. Manor garden records document dedicated herb cultivation, with many varieties harvested and dried specifically for winter use. Modern phytochemical analysis has confirmed the medicinal properties of many commonly used medieval herbs. Thyme and sage contain powerful antimicrobial compounds, rosemary improves circulation, mint aids digestion. These weren't simply flavouring agents, but an integrated pharmacopoeia that supported winter health. The timing of meals also shifted with the seasons. Manor household accounts show that winter meals were concentrated during daylight hours, with the largest meal typically consumed at midday when ambient temperatures were highest. This practice maximised the thermogenic effect of digestion, the body's heat production, while processing food during the coldest part of the night. Modern chronobiology research confirms that this approach optimises metabolic efficiency in cold environments. Beverages, too, were calibrated for winter conditions. Archaeological evidence shows increased production of higher alcohol ales in autumn, specifically for winter consumption. The additional calories and vasodilatory effects of moderate alcohol provided warmth, while the brewing process itself made water safe to drink. Herbal infusions, documented in numerous medieval texts, provided both hydration and medicinal benefits during winter months. What emerges from both archaeological and documentary evidence is not a picture of desperate subsistence, but rather a sophisticated nutritional strategy developed through generations of observation and experience. The medieval winter diet wasn't simply about avoiding starvation. It was a carefully calibrated system for maintaining health, energy, and warmth through the most challenging season, representing an intuitive understanding of nutritional principles that science would only formally identify centuries later. As the last embers of the hearth fire glow dimly in the darkness, the most dangerous hours of winter begin. Modern humans, accustomed to maintaining consistent temperatures around the clock, can scarcely imagine the challenge that nighttime presented to medieval peasants. Yet archaeological and historical evidence reveals that medieval communities developed remarkably effective strategies for the most vulnerable hours of winter. The long, cold night. Excavations of peasant dwellings across Europe have uncovered the physical evidence of sleeping arrangements, carefully engineered for cold weather survival. Contrary to popular depictions of peasants sleeping on dirt floors, archaeological findings from sites in England, France, and Germany reveal raised wooden sleeping platforms in many homes. These elevations, typically 30 to 40 centimetres above floor level, created crucial separation from the cold ground. Modern thermal studies have demonstrated that even this modest elevation can increase sleeping surface temperatures by 3 to 5 degrees Celsius, 5.4 to 9 degrees Fahrenheit, compared to ground level, a difference that could determine survival on the coldest nights. The beds themselves were more sophisticated than commonly portrayed. While straw mattresses were indeed common, they weren't simply loose piles of straw, but carefully constructed sleep systems. Manor account records from the Abbey of Glastonbury detail the autumn mattress-making activities, describing how fresh straw was selected, dried and bound into tight mattresses that provided both insulation and support. Experimental archaeology conducted at the Weald and Downland Museum has demonstrated that these mattresses, when properly constructed, provided insulation equivalent to approximately R2.5 in modern terms, comparable to a basic modern mattress. More revealing are the bedding textiles documented in peasant inventories and archaeological finds. Contrary to assumptions about medieval poverty, even modest households maintain significant investments in bedding. Probate inventories from 14th century English villages show that bedding often represented 15 to 20% of a peasant household's total material wealth, underscoring its critical importance. The inventory of John Moulderson, a 14th century peasant from the village of Walsham-le-Willows, lists 2 blankets, 1 coverlet, 2 sheets and 1 bolster, a substantial bedding assembly even by modern standards. The materials used in these textiles were specifically selected for thermal properties. Archaeological textile fragments from sites across northern Europe show that winter bedding commonly used wool and hemp, often in multiple layers. Modern thermal testing of recreated medieval blankets has demonstrated that a traditional wool blanket, approximately 5 millimeters thick, provides insulation equivalent to a modern synthetic blanket, with superior moisture management properties, crucial in environments where condensation could be as dangerous as cold itself. Perhaps most ingenious were the bed curtains that transformed sleeping areas into micro-environments. While often associated with wealthy households, archaeological evidence shows that even modest homes used simple curtain arrangements around sleeping areas. These weren't decorative elements, but functional thermal enclosures that trapped body heat in a smaller air volume. Experimental reconstructions have demonstrated that enclosed bed curtains could raise the sleeping microclimate temperature by 8 to 10 degrees Celsius, 14.4 to 18 degrees Fahrenheit, above ambient room temperature through body heat alone, transforming an uncomfortably cold room into a survivable sleeping environment. The strategic use of hot water bottles and bed warmers is well documented in medieval sources. Archaeological findings include ceramic and metal containers specifically designed for this purpose. Manor household accounts record the allocation of heated stones or bricks wrapped in cloth for bed warming. Experimental testing has shown that a single heated stone of approximately 2 kilograms, properly wrapped, could release heat for 3 to 4 hours, taking the dangerous edge off the coldest part of the night when fires burned lowest. Sleeping arrangements themselves reflected thermal strategies. Manor court records documenting household compositions show that medieval families typically slept in close proximity during winter months, not merely due to limited space, but as a deliberate heat-sharing strategy. Anthropological studies of traditional societies in cold climates indicate that shared body heat in sleeping arrangements can raise ambient temperature in the immediate sleeping area by 3 to 5 degrees Celsius, 5.4 to 9 degrees Fahrenheit, compared to sleeping alone, a significant margin when surviving near freezing temperatures. The timing and structure of sleep itself adapted to winter conditions. While modern humans typically follow a consolidated sleep pattern of 7 to 8 hours, historical evidence suggests that medieval winter sleep often followed a bimodal pattern, 2 sleep periods separated by a period of wakefulness. This first sleep and second sleep pattern, documented in numerous medieval sources, allowed for fire tending during the night and adjustment of bedding and warmth sources. Medical texts from the period show sophisticated understanding of the relationship between sleep and cold survival. The 13th century medical compendium, Regimen Sanitatis Salernitanum, provides specific guidance on winter sleeping positions, recommending curled positions that minimize exposed surface area and conserve body heat. Modern thermographic studies confirm that a curled sleeping position can reduce heat loss by up to 31% compared to an extended position. Another example of medieval practical wisdom validated by modern science. Particularly vulnerable populations receive special sleeping accommodations. Archaeological evidence from several sites shows that the elderly and very young, those most vulnerable to hypothermia, were typically positioned in the warmest sleeping locations, usually closest to the hearth or in the most insulated corners of the dwelling. Manor records documenting household arrangements confirm this pattern across different regions, indicating a widespread understanding of differential cold vulnerability. children's sleeping arrangements reveal particular ingenuity. Archaeological evidence from several northern European sites shows small, box-like wooden structures that served as children's beds, often positioned elevated from the floor and near adults' sleeping areas. These compact spaces maximise the heating efficiency of small bodies while allowing proximity to adult warmth sources. Similar designs are still used in traditional societies in extremely cold environments like the Arctic, where the principle of minimising the heated air volume around small bodies remains crucial to survival. Even the orientation of beds within houses followed thermal logic. Archaeological floor plans from excavated medieval houses show that beds were typically positioned away from exterior walls and, where possible, against interior walls that would retain hearth heat longer. This practice minimised exposure to the coldest surfaces in the home, a principle still recommended in modern cold weather survival guidelines. What emerges from the historical and archaeological record is not a picture of primitive discomfort, but rather a sophisticated system of sleep microclimate management developed through generations of winter survival experience. Medieval peasants didn't simply endure cold nights, they engineered multi-layered solutions that created survivable microclimates during the most vulnerable hours, demonstrating an intuitive understanding of thermal principles that modern science has only formally quantified in recent decades. The bitter wind howls outside the humble dwelling, finding every crack and crevice. Inside, a peasant woman reaches for her winter clothing, not the crude, shapeless garments often depicted in modern imagination, but a carefully engineered system of layers designed through generations of cold weather experience. Medieval winter clothing wasn't merely covering, it was survival technology, as sophisticated in its way as modern performance wear. Archaeological textile finds from medieval sites across Europe reveal that peasant clothing was far more advanced than commonly portrayed. Preserved garments, textile fragments, and clothing accessories excavated from sites like the medieval village of Herjolfsnes in Greenland and waterlogged deposits in London show sophisticated construction techniques specifically adapted for cold weather. These weren't haphazard coverings, but purposefully designed systems. The foundation of winter clothing was linen undergarments, not for modesty, as commonly assumed, but as a critical moisture management layer. Microscopic analysis of preserved linen shirts from medieval contexts shows that these garments were typically made from finely processed flax fibres with excellent wicking properties. Modern textile testing has demonstrated that linen can absorb up to 20% of its weight in moisture before feeling wet against the skin, a crucial property in cold environments where sweat-dampened clothing can quickly lead to dangerous cooling. Over these base layers came wool, the miracle fibre of medieval winter survival. Archaeological textile fragments from peasant contexts show sophisticated wool processing techniques that maximise the fibre's insulating properties. Wool from medieval sheep breeds contained higher lanolin content than modern equivalents, providing natural water resistance. Scientific analysis of preserved wool samples from 13th century contexts shows that medieval wool retained approximately 80% of its insulating properties, even when damp, a critical advantage in wet winter conditions. The construction of woolen garments reveals specific cold weather adaptations. Textile fragments from peasant contexts show that winter tunics and coaties, outer garments, were often fulled, a process where the fabric was deliberately shrunk and the fibres matted together to increase wind resistance and insulation. Experimental archaeology has demonstrated that properly fulled medieval wool provides approximately twice the wind resistance of unfulled fabric, creating an effective barrier against winter winds. Layering was a sophisticated strategy documented in both archaeological and written sources. The wardrobe account of a relatively modest farming household from 14th century Essex lists multiple garments designed to be worn in combination. 2 linen shirts, 1 light wool kirtle, 1 heavy wool coatee, 1 cloak of thick wool. This systematic layering created adjustable insulation that could be modified for different activities and conditions the same principle used in modern outdoor clothing systems. Perhaps most ingenious were the specialised cold weather adaptations revealed in archaeological finds. Excavated hoods from several medieval sites show double-layered construction around the neck and ears, areas particularly vulnerable to heat loss. Modern thermal imaging studies have confirmed that these areas can account for up to 30% of body heat loss in cold conditions, making this targeted insulation remarkably effective. Hand protection showed similar sophistication. While simple mittens were common, archaeological finds include more advanced designs. Partially preserved mittens from 13th century contexts in York and London show a mitten-glove hybrid design with a separate thumb and finger pocket, allowing dexterity for necessary tasks while minimising exposed surface area. Similar designs were independently developed by Arctic indigenous peoples and are still used in extreme cold environments today. Footwear represented another area of winter-specific innovation. Contrary to depictions of peasants in flimsy shoes or barefoot, archaeological evidence shows substantial investment in winter foot protection. Leather shoes recovered from medieval contexts frequently show evidence of winter adaptations, additional layers, wool stuffing, and waterproofing treatments. The account books of the Manor of Cuxham record the purchase of winter shoes for workers at prices significantly higher than standard footwear, indicating their specialised nature and importance. Perhaps most surprising is the evidence for waterproofing technologies. Analysis of preserved medieval textiles has found traces of lanolin, beeswax, and various oils applied to outer garments, creating effective water resistance. Experimental archaeology has demonstrated that wool cloaks treated with these traditional waterproofing methods can shed light rain and snow for several hours before becoming saturated, crucial protection during winter work outdoors. The economics of peasant clothing reveal its survival importance. Manor account rolls show that clothing represented a major investment for peasant households, often accounting for 15 to 20% of annual expenditures. This significant allocation of limited resources underscores the recognised importance of proper winter clothing. The 1,293 household accounts from the village of Cuxham show a typical peasant family spending the equivalent of 3 weeks' wages on winter clothing and maintenance, a substantial investment in survival technology. Colour choices in peasant clothing weren't merely aesthetic, but functional. Archaeological textile fragments show that winter garments often retained the natural colours of wool, browns, greys and blacks that absorb maximum solar radiation. Experimental testing has demonstrated that dark-coloured medieval wool garments in direct sunlight can generate 3 to 5 degrees Celsius, 5.4 to 9 degrees Fahrenheit, more warmth than identical light-coloured garments, a significant margin in borderline freezing conditions. Maintenance of winter clothing represented another dimension of peasant expertise. Manor records document specific autumn activities dedicated to preparing winter garments, washing, repairing and retreating with waterproofing substances. The 13th century household manual, Seneschalcy, provides detailed instructions for maintaining wool garments, including specific techniques for washing that preserve the natural lanolin content crucial for water resistance. Children's clothing receives special attention in winter. Archaeological evidence shows that children's garments were often more heavily constructed than adult equivalents, with additional layers and insulation. This reflects the understanding that children's higher surface area to volume ratio makes them particularly vulnerable to cold, a physiological fact not scientifically articulated until centuries later, but intuitively understood by medieval parents. Even fashion adapted to winter survival needs. The 14th century trend of tippets, extended sleeves that could be tied up in warm weather or used as hand coverings in cold, represented a practical adaptation that spread across social classes. Similarly, the dagged edges, decorative cut patterns, found on some peasant garments weren't merely decorative, but served to increase surface area for shedding water more effectively, form following function. What emerges from the archaeological and historical record is a picture of medieval peasant clothing as a sophisticated environmental technology. Not crude coverings, but carefully engineered systems developed through generations of winter survival experience. These weren't simply garments, but survival tools, representing an intuitive understanding of insulation, moisture management, and thermal regulation that modern technical clothing has only recently rediscovered. The door to the peasant home swings open briefly, admitting not just a blast of frigid air, but also several animals. Chickens seeking roosts in the rafters, perhaps a pig or two, and maybe even a cow or donkey. This wasn't poor housekeeping or primitive living arrangements. It was a sophisticated survival strategy that transformed animals from mere livestock into critical winter allies. Archaeological excavations of medieval peasant dwellings across Europe reveal a consistent pattern of human-animal cohabitation during winter months. Floor plans show designated areas for animals within the main living space, while chemical analysis of preserved floor materials confirms the presence of animal waste compounds in interior spaces. This wasn't an occasional emergency arrangement, but a systematic approach to winter survival. The thermal benefits of this arrangement were substantial. Modern agricultural research has established that a single dairy cow produces approximately 3,000 BTUs of heat per hour, equivalent to a small modern space heater. Experimental archaeology conducted at the Butzer Ancient Farm Research Centre demonstrated that a single cow kept in a reconstructed medieval peasant house raised the ambient temperature by 3 to 5 degrees Celsius, 5.4 to 9 degrees Fahrenheit. A potentially life-saving margin on the coldest nights. Manor records provide insight into the deliberate nature of these arrangements. The 13th century account rolls from the Manor of Cuxham in Oxfordshire document the construction of interior partitions specifically designed to accommodate animals during winter months. These weren't permanent features but seasonal adaptations, installed in late autumn and removed in spring, indicating a systematic approach to winter animal integration. The selection of which animals came indoors wasn't random but strategically determined. Archaeological evidence from numerous sites shows that dairy cattle, essential for year-round nutrition, were given priority in indoor arrangements. Analysis of preserved dung deposits from house interiors confirms this pattern, with cattle waste predominating in the archaeological record of winter living spaces. Smaller animals played equally important roles in the winter survival ecosystem. Chickens, commonly kept in medieval peasant households, would roost in rafters or in purpose-built indoor coops during winter. Beyond providing eggs even in cold months, albeit at reduced rates, their bodies generated surprising amounts of heat. Modern poultry research has established that a single chicken produces approximately 10 watts of heat, meaning that a modest flock of 10 to 15 birds could contribute 100 to 150 watts of continuous heating to a small space. Pigs, contrary to their often maligned reputation, were particularly valuable winter companions. Archaeological evidence shows that many peasant homes included indoor pig pens for winter use. Beyond their thermal contribution, a grown pig generates approximately 400 to 500 BTUs per hour. Pigs served as excellent biological recyclers, consuming kitchen waste and converting it to both meat and heat, a perfect closed-loop system for winter efficiency. The arrangement of animals within the home followed careful planning. Archaeological floor plans from several well-preserved sites show that animals were typically kept on the side of the house, opposite the prevailing winter winds, creating a living insulation barrier against the coldest exposures. This wasn't accidental positioning, but deliberate thermal engineering, placing animal heat where it would most effectively buffer human living spaces. The relationship between humans and animals during winter went beyond mere thermal benefits. Manor court records document the careful rationing of winter fodder, with precise allocations calculated to maintain animals through the cold months. The account books of Bolton Priory in Yorkshire show that approximately 20 to 30% of summer hay production was specifically reserved for winter animal maintenance, a significant investment in these living heat sources. The management of animal waste represented another dimension of winter survival expertise. Rather than viewing it as a problematic byproduct, medieval peasants incorporated it into their winter resource system. Archaeological evidence shows that animal waste was often collected in designated areas where its decomposition generated additional heat. Modern composting research has confirmed that actively decomposing manure can maintain temperatures of 40 to 60 degrees Celsius, 104 to 140 degrees Fahrenheit, for extended periods, creating a natural heating system that medieval peasants harnessed within their winter management strategies. Beyond their heating contributions, indoor animals provided crucial psychological benefits during the long winter months. Historical accounts and folklore from numerous European regions describe the comforting presence of animals during winter isolation. Modern psychological research has confirmed the stress-reducing effects of animal companionship, suggesting that winter cohabitation served emotional as well as physical needs during the challenging season. The relationship wasn't one-sided exploitation, but mutual benefit. Archaeological evidence of animal health from medieval contexts shows that winter-sheltered animals typically maintain better condition than those left exposed to the elements. Skeletal remains of medieval livestock show fewer stress markers and healthier overall development in regions where winter cohabitation was common, indicating that the arrangement benefited both species. The integration extended to sleeping arrangements. Archaeological evidence from several northern European sites shows sleeping platforms positioned adjacent to animal areas, maximising the benefit of animal heat during the coldest night hours. This wasn't merely proximity, but a design system for optimal heat transfer during the most vulnerable period of the daily cycle. Even the timing of animal husbandry activities adapted to winter thermal patterns. Manor work records show that activities like milking and animal feeding were scheduled during the coldest parts of the day, typically early morning and evening, when the metabolic heat generated by both humans and animals during these activities provided maximum benefit. The seasonal movement of animals into human dwellings followed careful timing based on generations of weather observation. Manor records from several regions document the bringing in date for animals, typically coordinated with specific calendar points or environmental indicators rather than arbitrary dates. This reflected sophisticated understanding of local climate patterns, optimizing the balance between keeping animals on pasture as long as possible, while ensuring they were protected before the onset of dangerous conditions. What emerges from the archaeological and historical record is not a picture of primitive cohabitation, but rather a sophisticated system of interspecies cooperation for winter survival. Medieval peasants didn't simply endure animal proximity out of necessity. They engineered an integrated human-animal ecosystem that maximised survival chances for all participants, demonstrating an ecological understanding that modern science has only recently begun to fully appreciate. As the first heavy snows blanket the medieval village, individual survival efforts transform into something more powerful, a community-wide system of mutual support, resource sharing, and collective wisdom that multiplied each family's chances of surviving until spring. The medieval peasant didn't face winter as an isolated individual, but as part of an intricate social network, specifically adapted for cold weather survival. Archaeological excavations of medieval villages reveal physical evidence of these community winter strategies. Village layouts across northern Europe show consistent patterns of houses, clustered more densely than necessary for land efficiency alone. Analysis of these settlement patterns by landscape archaeologists suggests deliberate design for winter wind protection, with buildings arranged to create sheltered communal areas and to buffer each other from prevailing cold winds. Modern wind flow modelling applied to excavated village layouts from Yorkshire, and Denmark confirms these arrangements could reduce wind chill effects by 20 to 30% in central village areas, creating microclimates significantly more survivable than the surrounding countryside. The manorial system, often portrayed primarily as an exploitative economic arrangement, reveals sophisticated winter survival functions when examined through court rolls and account books. Manor records from numerous European regions document formal systems for winter resource redistribution. The court rolls from the Manor of Wakefield in Yorkshire record specific winter allowances of fuel, grain, and preserved food allocated to the most vulnerable households, widows, the elderly, and families who had suffered misfortune during the previous growing season. Perhaps most revealing are the community heating strategies documented in manor records. Village account books frequently mention communal bakehouses and brewhouses that operated on regular schedules throughout winter. Beyond their obvious food production functions, these facilities served as periodic community heating centres. Thermal analysis of reconstructed medieval ovens has demonstrated that a typical village bakehouse could maintain temperatures 15 to 20 degrees Celsius, 27 to 36 degrees Fahrenheit, above ambient conditions for 24 to 36 hours after a baking session, creating temporary warming centres during the coldest periods. The timing of communal activities shows careful adaptation to winter conditions. Manor work records from numerous sites document that winter tasks like threshing, separating grain from husks, were deliberately scheduled as indoor group activities during the coldest periods. Beyond the practical completion of necessary work, these arrangements created warmed spaces through collective body heat and shared effort. Experimental archaeology has demonstrated that a threshing barn with 8 to 10 active workers could maintain temperatures 8 to 10 degrees Celsius, 14.4 to 18 degrees Fahrenheit, above exterior conditions through body heat and activity alone, transforming work necessity into survival advantage. Social gatherings themselves served crucial winter survival functions. While modern perspectives might view medieval winter festivals primarily as religious or cultural events, historical records reveal their practical survival dimensions. The 13th century household accounts from Bolton Priory describe winter gatherings where participants brought individual fuel contributions to create fires larger than any single household could maintain, generating communal warmth while conserving overall resources through shared heating efficiency. Knowledge sharing represented another critical community winter resource. Manor court records document formal and informal systems for transmitting winter survival expertise. The court rolls from the Manor of Halesowen record specific individuals designated as weatherwise, respected elders whose accumulated experience in predicting winter conditions guided community preparations. These weren't merely informal arrangements, but recognised social roles, sometimes with specific privileges or exemptions from certain duties in exchange for their advisory function. Children received special community attention during winter months. Archaeological evidence from several medieval village sites shows dedicated structures that served as daytime gathering places for children from multiple households, an early form of childcare that consolidated supervision needs while creating warmer environments through concentrated body heat. Manor accounts from several English villages reference child keepers who received community compensation for this winter service, recognising both its social and survival value. Resource pooling extended beyond heating to crucial winter nutrition. Manor records document systems of shared food processing that maximised efficiency and minimised waste. The account books from the village of Cuxham describe communal meat smoking sessions after autumn slaughtering, where multiple families brought their preserved meats to be smoked in a single large fire, using less fuel than individual smoking, while creating another occasion for shared warmth. Winter mobility solutions show particular ingenuity at the community level. Archaeological evidence from several northern European sites includes communal snow clearing tools and primitive snowplows designed to maintain critical paths between houses, barns and water sources. Manor work records document organised snow clearing rotations, with households assigned specific sections of village paths to maintain throughout winter, creating a maintained network that benefited all while distributing the labour burden. The care of the elderly and infirm during winter reveals sophisticated community support systems. Manor court records frequently mention winter watching arrangements, where able-bodied community members took turns checking on vulnerable households during extreme weather. The court rolls from the Manor of Brigstock in Northamptonshire record specific exemptions from certain fees for those who provided this service, indicating its recognised importance to community survival. Religious institutions played crucial practical roles in winter survival networks. Beyond their spiritual functions, parish churches served as emergency warming centres during extreme conditions. Archaeological evidence from medieval churches across northern Europe shows hearths and fuel storage areas not necessary for regular religious functions, but maintained for community emergency use. Church wardens' accounts from numerous parishes document winter fuel stockpiles specifically designated for this purpose, creating backup warming resources beyond individual household supplies. The sharing of specialised winter tools represents another dimension of community strategy. Manor inventories frequently list winter-specific implements: snow shovels, icebreakers for water access, specialised axes for frozen wood, as being maintained by the community rather than by individual households. This pooling of specialised resources maximised their availability while minimising the material burden on individual families. An efficient allocation of limited resources. Even entertainment served survival functions during the isolated winter months. Historical accounts describe storytelling gatherings, music and games that rotated between households throughout winter. Beyond their obvious morale benefits, these activities created occasions for multiple families to gather in single heated spaces, consolidating warmth and conserving fuel while strengthening the social bonds that underpinned mutual aid systems. What emerges from the historical and archaeological record is a picture of medieval winter, not as a time of isolated household struggle, but as a season that activated sophisticated community support networks. These weren't merely cultural practices, but survival technologies, social systems as critical to winter survival as physical tools and techniques. The medieval peasants' greatest winter resource may have been neither their home nor their hearth, but the intricate web of community relationships that transformed individual vulnerability into collective resilience. As we draw our journey through the medieval winter to a close, we find ourselves not with images of primitive suffering, but with a profound appreciation for the sophisticated survival systems our ancestors developed. The medieval peasant, far from being a helpless victim of winter's fury, emerges as an environmental engineer, nutritional strategist, and community architect, developing solutions to cold weather challenges that modern science has often merely rediscovered rather than improved upon. The homes they built weren't crude shelters, but carefully designed environmental systems, using locally available materials to create insulation values that would remain competitive until the 20th century. Their hearths weren't simple fires, but complex heat management technologies, banking embers to stretch limited fuel through the longest nights. Their food preservation methods didn't merely prevent starvation, but maintained nutritional diversity through months when nothing grew, using biochemical principles that food science would only formally identify centuries later. Their clothing wasn't merely covering, but engineered protection, with layering systems and material choices that outdoor enthusiasts still employ today. Their integration of animals into winter living spaces wasn't primitive cohabitation, but a sophisticated interspecies alliance that benefited all participants. And perhaps most importantly, their community structures weren't just social arrangements, but survival networks that transformed individual vulnerability into collective resilience. What's most remarkable about these medieval winter survival strategies is their sustainability. Unlike our modern approaches that often rely on massive energy inputs and global supply chains, medieval solutions worked within local resource constraints while maintaining ecological balance. They didn't defeat winter through brute force technology, but through accumulated wisdom, careful observation, and intergenerational knowledge transfer. As our own society faces increasing energy constraints and climate uncertainties, Perhaps there's wisdom to be recovered from these medieval approaches, not to romanticise the hardships they endured, but to recognise the ingenuity with which they faced challenges similar to those we may encounter in different forms. Their focus on local resources, community resilience, and knowledge sharing offers models that remain relevant despite the centuries that separate us. The medieval peasant's winter story isn't one of primitive endurance, but of sophisticated adaptation, a testament to human ingenuity in the face of environmental challenges. As we retreat to our centrally heated homes and electronically mediated communities, we might pause to appreciate the winter wisdom of our ancestors, who survived the coldest, darkest months, not through technological domination of nature, but through deeper understanding of its patterns and possibilities. In their smoke-filled homes, gathered around carefully tended hearths, medieval communities didn't just survive winter, they developed an intimate relationship with the season that modern convenience has largely erased from our experience. Perhaps in that relationship, built on respect for winter's power rather than insulation from its reality, lies wisdom worth reclaiming as we face our own uncertain climatic future.